The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in different parts of the world. It's a delightful pleasure. It's a pleasure for me to welcome you all. This is Krishna Vadula from Indo-Universal Collaboration for Engineering Education. I'm based in Hyderabad, India now, and it's a real pleasure for me to introduce to you the team from the University of Massachusetts Lowell, from where I've recently retired and returned back to India. So we have Professor Ashwin Mehta, who is going to introduce who is the heading up in the Entrepreneurship Center, Jack Wilson Center for Entrepreneurship, very active in that center, and the liaison between our IUCE and the center. He's going to is hosting all these webinar series, by the way, for the last 1.5 to 2 years. We've been having a series of webinars, all because of Professor Ashwin Mehta. So Ashwin, come on in and introduce the speaker for us today.
Thank you, Dr. Vadula, and welcome to Jack M. Wilson Center for Entrepreneurship and in collaboration with the IUCE. I'm very pleased to introduce our presenter today, Dr. Sandhya Balasubramanian, who is an Assistant Dean of Academic and Corporate Venture Program Development at UMass Lowell. She recently received her PhD in Business Administration Entrepreneurship Concentration and MBA from UMass Lowell. Her research interests include the entrepreneurial orientation, entrepreneurial universities, venture development organization, and team performance. She recently co-authored an article published in the Strategic Entrepreneurship Journal in January 2020, titled "Does University Entrepreneurial Orientation Matter? Evidence from University Performance." Is also co-authoring a book on entrepreneurial orientation along with Bill Wells, Joshua White, and Vishal Gupta. She has presented at several national, regional, and conferences, received the Paper Award for Entrepreneurship in 2015 and Outstanding Reviewer Award in 2017. She currently serves on the editorial board of the South Asian Journal of Business Studies. I'm very pleased to welcome Sandhya Subramanian, and she's going to talk about entrepreneurial orientation and new venture success. Thank you, Sandhya. Take it over.
Thank you very much, Professor Mehta, Dr. Vedula, and I also want to thank my research advisor and the chair of the Marketing, Entrepreneurship, and Innovation Department at the Manning School of Business, Professor Yang, for inviting me to present today. I'm so happy to have this opportunity to share some insights on new venture success and also speak about entrepreneurial orientation. And both these topics are central to the study and growth of entrepreneurship. And so this is a great opportunity for all of us who are here today to get some more insights into this topic, and hopefully this will inform you in your own teaching experiences as you continue to work with students. And if you're researchers, hopefully I will leave you with a couple of insights and kind of tweak up your interest so that you can continue this research, and we can continue this conversation as we even beyond this presentation. Ashwin, I'm hoping you're able to see the slides and it's all good before I jump into the presentation.
Okay, yes, it's all good.
Excellent. So here's a quick outline of what I would be discussing with you over the next 30-40 minutes. And the topic is about the concept of new venture teams, and it's capturing global attention. And as Dr. Vedula mentioned earlier, Ashwin and Professor Yang have recognized this, and they're trying to initiate more activities that capture the global nature of entrepreneurship. And you can see across wherever you are from joining across the globe today, you can see that cities are aspiring and they are trying to develop thriving entrepreneurial ecosystems. Universities are investing heavily in entrepreneurship programs, and not to miss out, both Hollywood and Bollywood are featuring startup teams and in movies and televisions. So for anyone who is involved in the new venture creation process, you feel like you're already in the limelight. So I'd like to take some time to first discuss both real-world trends and also emerging interest in new ventures. And then as we continue the conversation, I'd like to take some time to discuss a very, very focal topic of interest in entrepreneurship research called entrepreneurial orientation. This is a primary focus of my own research, and my dissertation was focused on entrepreneurial orientation. So this is a topic that is very, very close to my heart. And and I chose this not just because I like entrepreneurial orientation. It is also because entrepreneurial orientation and its positive relationship to firm performance broadly has been investigated across varied research fields, but its application to new ventures at the team level is a topic that is gaining a lot of emerging interest in this area. So today we'll spend some time looking at the EO and new venture team domain and how it offers opportunity for future researchers and insights for faculty and inventors who are working with new venture teams. And just to set the baseline, here is a quick definition of what we mean by new ventures and the terms that are used interchangeably. It's, simply put, it's a group of people working together to advance a new venture. What is very captivating about this is it's a very open-ended definition, so anybody can define new venture as in many different ways. And if you look back in literature and in your own life, we use these words: entrepreneurial teams, startup team, founding teams, new venture teams. All these are used interchangeably, but they all essentially mean one and the same. So throughout the presentation, we will be using these words interchangeably as well to kind of say how these are interwoven into the basic fabric of what we call as new venture teams. So a quick look at the US startup activity. The United States is both the birthplace and a dominant location for modern high-tech startups, and the funding model that has helped support them through the venture capital mechanism has also was started here in US. And you can see that the numbers there says it's 86.86% of the national rate is the opportunity share of new ventures. When we say opportunity share of new ventures, what it essentially means is 86% of the people who end up starting a new venture are doing this out of their own free interest. It's not because they are pushed by their economic means or a need to do it, but they're doing this out of their passion, which is something that is very significant here as we continue to engage with anybody who's interested in a new venture, especially for us as educators. If you're working with student entrepreneurs, the ability to bring out their passion and allow them to pursue and be engaged in a new venture creation approach is very, very critical. But even though for decades we have seen venture capital has been growing, since the 1990s, US was on a boom, but you can see that there is a declining share of global venture capital investment in the US. And in some ways, since the mid 1990s, the Center for American Entrepreneurship shares data that almost 95% of the venture capital activity and the investment has been lost by the US to global startup activity. So that's something that's very interesting for US-based researchers to pursue. But the flip side of the story is interesting because if you look at global startup activity, globally, countries like India, China, and the European nations are claiming the attention of venture capitalists, and especially because this particular webinar is focused on the Indo-Universal collaboration. I want to point out here that India is actually doing really well, and you can see that it's got the second largest share of global venture deals and if you look at that, it's collectively it's a good picture, but if you drill into the details on the right hand side, six huge growing cities in India: Ahmedabad, Delhi, Bangalore, Calcutta, Pune, all these are identified as the top 20 among the top 20 global cities identified for growth in venture capital deals. This is something that's very, very impressive for anybody who is working with new venture teams in India. As often as it happens, the research interest in new venture teams closely follows the economic ups and downs. And over the last 30 years, you'd see that there has been a spurt in the number of research articles that are being published on the topic of new venture research. And what is interesting in this particular graph is that the truly interdisciplinary nature of new venture research. And you can see at the bottom there is a legend. You can see the growing share of entrepreneurship in this research domain. But across the board, you can see that economics, finance, innovation, management, all these areas are also contributing to the conversations in new venture research. So that's again a very positive fact for anybody who is looking at different facets of new venture research to be enthusiastic about pursuing this as a field of study. Now, as we go into the details, I just wanted to quickly capture the broad areas of new venture topics that have been clustered over time. And you will see that these are the topic areas that we talk about most often in new venture research. It is the type of the new venture, whether it's an independent or a corporate venture, the founding environment, the entry barriers, the institutional environment, national culture in many places that we talk about in terms of the founding environment, and these create both barriers and are also help the new ventures succeed in many cases. A lot of attention has been paid to entrepreneurs and founding teams. Then we see a lot of research on new venture strategies, what makes them successful, the typologies, the competitive strategies, and a significant attention has been paid to what is new venture performance. And we've classified new venture performance in three broad categories. One is gaining legitimacy, because these are new entities that come into existence. So establishing and ensuring that they gain the legitimacy is a big factor, and it's a success in itself. And then we talk about the second stage, which is the survival, and then the growth and the monetary success of it. At this point, one of the good research areas and a resource that I would like to share is the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor. Again, considering the fact that we are in a very global conversation around entrepreneurship here, there is a conceptual model that is put out by the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor, and the database of information that is being created. This group collects a lot of information about entrepreneurship activity, and unlike a lot of research that is spent on the context being the United States, and oftentimes we look at research where we say, well, at the end you will see that in the limitation saying, well, this is all great, but again, I'm looking at a US context, and US context and the finding from US-based literature and research has dominated entrepreneurship research. And with good databases like the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor, there is rich information about what is happening around the world, and researchers should always be looking at that as an opportunity to look at their own entrepreneurial activity in their countries. And it allows for looking at national culture and being able to accommodate and understand how those create barriers. The other conceptual model on the side is about the early stage entrepreneurship, how the new venture development process is actually broken into conception, firm birth, and then persistence. And this is something that we will talk a little bit more about as we move forward. A lot of attention, and this again, when you're talking about new venture research, team formation is an important factor in new venture research, and significant attention in broad entrepreneurship literature has been based on the sequential input process output framework. So they've treated it in much more like a very engineering approach to feeding something in. Something happens in between where the process takes effect, and then you see the output. In this framework, the founding team characteristics are shown to impact the founding team process, which in turn influences the new venture performance. Again, within this standard model, entrepreneurial team formation precedes and determines the founding characteristics. But if you look more closely, and if you look at the input process output model, what is really important when you look at the process aspect of it is you put in a lot of inputs, and again I would like to call attention to to factors that are very important here. When you talk about inputs, as though it seems like a very intangible thing, there is a personality orientation here. There is a mental ability of the founders that is being counted in as the prior experience, the social capital. All these things are not tangible and secured from outside. These are essentially characteristics of the founders, the founding team, the entrepreneurial team, the different ways in which we classify startup teams. And then when you talk about the team processes, these are the processes that act as mediators to generate the outcomes that we all see and appreciate in real world. And when we talk about outcomes, there are so many different ways in which we measure new venture success. It's often sales growth, it's profitability, how many employees are involved, because that involves a lot of economic impact. And especially where we are in a pandemic, where there has been a significant jolt to the economic activity, the outcomes being measured by the number of employees has a lot of economic impact on the success of new ventures. The level of innovativeness, satisfaction, and well-being, all these are critical aspects in which we dissect new venture success. Again, speaking of new venture success, I'm sure that most of you recognize some of these successful startups. Tesla, we probably see a Tesla almost every day in some part of our travels in our daily in our daily life. We use some of these startups in a very, very productive fashion at work, like Slack, and of course Amazon, Lyft, and all these. You can see the spattering of startups that we have learned to recognize, we appreciate, and interact with. And you would see that these are all US based startups. And to acknowledge the fact that just a few minutes ago we discussed that there is a declining share in the venture capital startup activity, I'm sharing here a number of other success stories. And this might be very familiar for a lot of audience in India, because these are Indian-based startups, which again have come to become part of our mainstream life. And this again goes to reinforce the fact that there is a global share of what is happening in the entrepreneurship world and the new venture world that has to be recognized and legitimized. And there is so much more scope for us to look at these success factors. Speaking of success, every coin has two sides. So you got to always think about the survival rate. And if you look back into just call back all the successful startup logos that we saw, they are at different sizes and shapes. And what this slide tells us is, behind every successful, when you follow every successful venture, there are 100 other failed businesses that have crashed and burned. Plenty of small business statistics, and I have shared one such statistics here, show that almost more than half of these startups that begin their journey towards new venture creation are gone by the end of 4 years. The liabilities that drive them to the ground are well documented and researched. And what is very, very interesting among the list of liabilities that I've captured, and that this is a list from one of the latest review articles in the field of entrepreneurship. I have the resources there so that you can go back and look at it. We have very little time, so I didn't want to spend too much time trying to give you the source per se. So what essentially these list of liabilities tell us is the odds are really stacked against them. If newness is a liability, then being old as a startup is also a liability. If adolescence is an issue, aging is an issue, and that tells us that new ventures probably don't have a time to stop and breathe. They have to be on the go all the time to ensure that their survival is at a good moment, maintains a good momentum. Speaking of failures, and I just want to share some examples of failures and probably the reasons behind why some of these companies fail. Here are some very, very popular failures, and more importantly, the reasons behind the failure. And you would see that there is either a no market need, they came in too early into the market. Google Glass, MoviePass was at one point a very, very successful venture, and everybody liked to go to the movies at $10 a month, but they ran out of cash because their model was not the greatest. Companies like Dudwala in India, okay, they failed, and it is because they were outcompeted. And of course, the famous Tata Nano, it was a wonderful car, but their objective was to provide a car at a very, very competitive price, and ran into pricing and cost issues. But what remains unsaid, and bots is a very rare example that we can actually go back and read about, the fact that one of the biggest reasons of new venture failure is not the right team. And if you look at these 5 reasons, and there are plenty more reasons for which companies fail, but when you talk about not having a right team, if you look more closely, not having a right team in some ways can cause all the other failures as well, because the market need is not created by itself. It is the team that puts its brain power and comes up with great ideas and say, this is the idea that we need to pursue. The business model, the profit model that you adopt is a result of the team's engagement. It's a result of the team's cognitive ability, getting outcompeted, pricing, cost issues. All those things are results. But in my approach, I would think that not having the right team, even though it is not very documented, because nobody wants to really come out and say that we didn't have a right team, that's why we failed, we tend to default and identify a more tangible reason for the failure. And we'll talk about this a little more, and the reason for and the solutions for how to identify a team-based solution to creating new venture success as we go forward. The trends in new venture creation are phenomenal, and so what it essentially suggests is, just as the trends in new venture in the real world is increasing, interest in new venture creation is very, very important. So if we know that most companies don't survive within the first 5 years, so it's probably a good idea for all of us to zoom in on the new venture creation process rather than focus on the endpoint success and gloat over and be happy about the 5% of the companies that made it big. And I'm sharing with you that just in the last couple of years, there have at least been 6 review articles in the field of new venture creation that focus on creating new ventures, looking at entrepreneurial team formation, and focusing on the multidimensional nature of team formation process. That embryonic stage is something that is very, very critical. And I think that's important for many of you who have joined the webinar today, because you are probably in a space where you are engaging with student entrepreneurs or early stage entrepreneurs in a manner where you can contribute to their success at the early stage of formation. Now, to explore a little more on the stages of entrepreneurial process, Shepard et al. In a very recent review article identified 10 different new venture subtopics, and you can see that these were essentially organized into 3 major stages of entrepreneurial process: the process of co-creating, the process of organizing a startup, and then performing as a startup. And for the sake of convenience, to have less words and allow you to assimilate the discussion today, I'm making use of more of the conceptual model so that it can allow for you to understand the connections between why these process stages are very, very important. And you would see that they have broken down the different subtopics into these process stages so that at each stage you will know what to focus on. And they inductively deducted and they have created this framework by looking at about 143 different articles that have been published over a period of time. And that is a very, very rich source of information for anybody who's interested in getting into this topic of research, and also for seasoned researchers. Looking more into the team formation process, Lazar et al. Recently presented an integrative framework that explains the dynamic nature of the formation process. They talk about the origins of new venture teams, the primary formation strategies that are used to initiate co-founding relationships, and their effect on team characteristics, the processes, and the performance. And this again is a very, very useful framework for us as faculty and as researchers to start thinking about where in this particular process are you engaging with a budding entrepreneur, and be able to provide good guidance and mentorship as you go along. And this is very important because we will speak a lot about new ventures and early stage. We are still not addressing the fact that entrepreneurship is a collective phenomenon. That is a big opportunity for us because we always talk about new venture teams, and even though we say new venture teams, the focus is always on this entrepreneur with a cape who has made it big, and we often forget about the team that is right there with this person. No, very rarely do you find a single a solo entrepreneur. This myth has essentially changed, and if you look at your own processes of how you are encouraging student entrepreneurship, or even in the classroom, just in regular entrepreneurship classes, or any type of even engineering education, we're talking about engineering education, anytime in a class-based environment, in a project-based environment, we never say go and do this by yourself. We say let's get a small group together, and that is the same example that transcends into entrepreneurship, and it's a collective phenomena. The team characteristics are very, very important for us to recognize, and this research is very, very important by Matthias et al., which says that imprinting has a lasting effect on entrepreneurial decision making, and this is important for us all as, again, faculty researchers to understand, because we have such an influential role that we play in engaging with early stage startups. And a very important piece of literature that has just been published recently by Shim and Per Davidson, very valuable, focuses on the panel study of entrepreneurial dynamics, and what they have found is the venture creation process, that all the processes that end in abandonment, failure, have a much longer duration than those venture creation processes that end up in a successful venture emergence. So there is a lot of information that is available in that paper about how they've analyzed, and they essentially say that successful ventures are peaking at the end of 3 months. And this is an important statistic for us to go back and look at it. Again, this research is based on secondary data, and they looked at 1,600 nascent ventures. So I'm thinking that across the globe, this might have a lot of implication for how we are nurturing early stage startups. When you talk about collective entrepreneurship, we talk about team characteristics. We have just acknowledged that the lonely hero entrepreneur is a myth, and what is very, very critical is the necessity for the teams to be in sync. And in that context, the construct of entrepreneurial orientation, I'd like to introduce the concept of entrepreneurial orientation, because it is a very, very important concept which has for over 30 years been a focal area of entrepreneurship research. And as I mentioned earlier, its importance to firm performance and as a firm level construct has been widely acknowledged. The individual level EO studies are emerging, but what is more important for us as entrepreneurship researchers and faculty is that team-based EO behavioral studies are claiming their prime time now. And there have been, over the last 5 years, a dabbling of research into team-level EO studies. Some assumed homogeneity across the hierarchies, and some of them were limited to dyadic studies. But a very significant publication that came out last year is the effect of varied team EO configurations that enhance performance. And I'll go into detail a little more, because that it has a lot of value for what we have to learn and take away from this discussion today. Team EO congruence, and this is the area which is very dear to my heart, and a lot of my research has been spent on looking at team EO congruence, because when you bring number of people together, we all know that even though we call it a team, it essentially has multiple people with multiple functioning brains, and each person comes with their own perspective and their perception of how a particular aspect or a task has to be done. And for the lack of if there is a lack of congruence in that kind of thinking, then performance can really suffer. And we'll discuss a little more as we go further into this particular topic. Stepping back, for those who are not familiar with EO research actively, I just want to give you a background on what entrepreneurial orientation, and we call it abridged EO, so it's easier for us to keep discussing about EO as we go further. It emerged out of strategy making process literature, and is broadly defined as the methods, disposition, practices, and decision-making styles that managers use to act entrepreneurially. So a very, very broad definition, and has been variously described as EO has been characterized as characteristics of people, of firms, as capabilities, as the culture, and as the cognition. And EO is essentially manifested in many ways, and we see this, and maybe we don't recognize it as an entrepreneurial orientation. It is the ability of or the style of the top management in capturing top management goals. It is also manifest as organizational configuration. And in our own case, where we're looking at new venture research, it is manifested in how new entry initiatives are being advanced. So to look at it a little more in detail, entrepreneurial orientation is a multidimensional construct and comprises of three primary dimensions. One is the innovativeness. And when you talk about innovativeness, it's the ability to produce new ideas, the ability to go beyond routines. It facilitates the development of unique approaches and has the potential. For every good thing, there is a downside. So when you're talking about starting new ideas and implementing new ideas, we must acknowledge the fact that innovation comes at a cost, often in the form of huge upfront investments and R&D expenditures. Proactiveness is the opportunity-seeking behavior that allows us to show initiative and actively change circumstances that we are facing in. It also allows us to adapt to circumstances, and at the same time, what happens is you can either be highly proactive, and you will be able to quickly analyze things, but at the same time, people might be on the other side of the proactiveness spectrum where they fail to recognize opportunities and they do not move quickly. So that is also a part of entrepreneurial orientation. And the third dimension is the risk-taking dimension, which we are probably much more familiar with in our observation of entrepreneurial activity, is the willingness and response to risk-taking activities, and the ability to venture into the unknown, committing to a large amount of assets. And for some of these companies, the ability to borrow heavily. Some people are very risk averse and do not want to stack up debt. But at the same time, some of the innovative activities needs a lot of investment into risk-taking behavior. So that said, from the perspective of research, it's good to define a construct in abstract terms. But for practical purposes, entrepreneurial orientation and literature can be measured. And that's something that as researchers, we immediately say, well, all this is good. How do I measure entrepreneurial orientation? How do I recognize it when I deal with it? So there are surveys that are scales that have been developed. And one of the most prevalent and trusted scales is the Cohen and Slevin scale, though we find a number of variations of the Cohen and Slevin scale. This is essentially suited for primary data analysis, where you can administer surveys on a number of new venture teams. If you're looking at more secondary data-based approaches to research, then computer-aided text analysis, where Short et al. Have developed a dictionary of words that are used to signify EO dimensions. And it's usually used when there is published information, or if you're looking at business plans. What do the words signify? Do the words essentially convey the level of entrepreneurial orientation that is manifested in a new venture team's ideas? There is also psychometric assessment of textual information, which is a slightly varied version of applying a survey-based research. And then again, going back to secondary data analysis, there are financial ratio indicators for EO. And I have the resources there for those who are interested in learning a little more about the measures. And if you're curious, please pursue these good reads. Switching back to bringing us back on track with new venture creation, team entrepreneurial orientation. There are very few studies that speak about team entrepreneurial orientation. We're just beginning to scratch the surface of that. But a very impactful and an insightful research was recently published by Cohen et al. And they took a configurational approach to entrepreneurial orientation, and they did a FSQCA analysis. And what it suggests is there are different configurations in which entrepreneurial orientation can manifest itself. And if you look at this table, and I have again, I'm for the sake of convenience, I'm sharing to you what is easily digestible, because if we go into too much detail of research, we would not probably have enough time to discuss a lot more. You can see that there are certain types of paths that they developed where the different dimensions of EO are essentially present. They are indicative of presence, and then you can say that it contributes to high team performance. And they provided both a tabular approach and also a diagrammatic approach. I'd encourage you to go and read further. The other perspective, and this is an opportunity for me to share my own research about team entrepreneurial orientation and the congruence. This is part of my own PhD work that I started looking at the dynamics of entrepreneurial orientation and the impact of congruence among team members in their ability to contribute to team performance. I studied about 84 nascent teams in early stage teams spread across 5 or 6 countries. Part of my research was conducted in the US, and part of it was conducted in India. And I looked at both incubator-based new ventures and also new venture creation teams. And Ashwin and I have collaborated a lot during the 2-week accelerated programs that Ashwin runs as part of the global entrepreneurial exchange programs. We have studied those teams, and the findings, I'm summarizing the findings quickly. I did a polynomial regression with surface analysis, and it suggests that team effectiveness is highest when team member EO and the founder EO are lowest. And you might say, well, if EO is important, why are we talking about it being at the lower end of the spectrum and being good? And that's because we are looking at the direct effect. And oftentimes, in real life, EO does not directly impact team performance. Oftentimes, it happens in the presence of other factors that contribute to either enhancing the performance or taking away from the performance. And in my study, I looked at team characteristics and team dynamics as very, very critical factors that contribute to the EO congruence effect on team performance. And I'm giving you a couple of quick examples that when team EO congruence was moderated by interdependence of teams, the effect of the discrepancy was found to matter. Interdependent teams did better. But then I also studied the result of social hierarchy or power, because oftentimes new ventures go out and get these amazing stars who are serial entrepreneurs so that they can have a greater legitimacy, while having these stars and as a part of their new venture teams, there is a downside to that, and that was part of my study as well. So the findings essentially emphasize the critical role of team members in enhancing performance in new venture teams. It kind of dispelled the myth that EO perceptions are homogeneous, which takes us back to why understanding the collective effect of team members is important. And the founder team perceptual congruence was an important consideration. And finally, as I said, the direct benefits had limited success. But what it essentially highlighted for us is interdependent teams, the conceptual nature of the task, if they are being set up in an interdependent fashion, is very, very conducive to generating success in new venture teams. Team effectiveness was higher because when in interdependent teams, because with greater information sharing and learning in interdependent teams, there was a positive relationship between team EO congruence and team performance. We didn't see that kind of results in cohesive teams, because cohesion by itself can be a very, very resource intensive process. So it can take away from the success, because like EO, cohesion is also resource intensive, which means teams are spending a lot more of their time and effort trying to engage in that kind of activity. Moving on, again, I mentioned briefly that the presence of high status or high power individuals is something that is not really conducive to success of team members. So there is an optimal number, because when you look at high status individuals, the benefits that accrue from them are significant, because they could act as good boundary spanners and help the new venture teams create unique resource combination. But there is a balance. It's not necessarily a good idea to stack your new venture creation team with a lot of star players, because then you have ego clashes, you have a question of whose idea is the best and whose path we need to follow. And that kind of tension is never a good thing for new venture teams. So I think we have about 5 minutes to go. So I'm just going to leave with this a number of questions saying we discussed a lot about new venture teams and entrepreneurial orientation. What is the significant takeaway for faculty and researchers in this? Essentially, in our primary role as faculty members, it is the critical role that we play in imprinting nascent teams and new venture teams has to be recognized. We can teach we can teach early stage and student entrepreneurship teams to recognize the role of team level EO. Don't just think about I as an individual contributing to new venture. In addition to passion, start thinking about where are our EO dimensions being congruent. Who has a higher level of innovativeness? Where is the proactiveness in the team coming from? Which team member has what kind of strength, and start playing to the strengths of the EO of the team members. What it also identifies for us, these research and the takeaways from current research, is that team characteristics are critical. So again, when we talk about new venture teams, being able to identify the dynamics, that the interplay between interdependence, cohesion, the power, the status, trust and commitment, all these things are very, very important. So when we come into new venture formation stage, it is important that everybody who comes to the table is encouraged to start thinking about the collective behavior and the collective success, rather than say, what will I get out of this? So there is a lot more selfishness that has to be associated to new venture founders, because it is not, there is a lot of eyes in team behavior, but instead of focusing on me, you start thinking about the innovation, you start thinking about the insights that you can bring into the team. Oftentimes, we as researchers, as faculty, we tend to focus a lot more on the successes. You look at our entrepreneurship books, there is a lot of focus on the successful ventures. And we all know that for every successful venture, there are probably 10 failed ventures. And there is a lot of learning and no shame in understanding failed stories. We know that a new venture creation is short, so there is an opportunity for us to get in there and make a significant difference as a mentor, as playing a faculty role. The 5-year survival rate is low, which is, again, looking at it from an advantageous standpoint as an educator. If you are engaged in student entrepreneurships and your students go on to create successful ventures, stay in touch with these companies, startups, because what is happening to them in the first 5 years has a lot of value to what you can bring back into the classroom. There are very, very significant lessons that we can bring back into the classroom, into our business plan competitions, into our everyday analysis of entrepreneurship stories, not only during times when money is flush, but in downtowns. Fortunately, unfortunately, we are finding ourselves in a pandemic situation. While we talk a lot about the economy struggling and so many jobs lost, there are still startups that have been very, very successful. So we should probably, in our own environment, start looking at what kind of new ventures are actually taking advantage of the downturn. There is a great publication that has also been published about startups in times of crisis. It talks about resilience. It talks about how they can approach the crisis that we are all facing right now, with specific reference to COVID-19. And I just want to leave again with a few questions from a recent from an article by Gupta and Gupta. They raise a number of questions for people who are engaged in student entrepreneurship and for entrepreneurial ecosystems. And my own interest in being in entrepreneurial universities is what are the methods and techniques that universities can use to encourage entrepreneurship? What makes some colleges more successful in engaging with student entrepreneurship rather than the others? And what is the role of individual teachers in student entrepreneurship? These seem like very simple questions, but they give us a lot of opportunity to think about what our own role is and how we can collectively come together to start thinking about generating a research area in itself, thinking, saying, what is the role of all the players who are in the ecosystem? How can we contribute? How can we improve the success rate of new venture startups? I'm going to end here with these points for you to think about, and I turn it back to Krishna to open up the conversation for a quick Q&A. I hope we still have time.
Yes, we do have time, Sandhya, for a fascinating presentation you gave. So Ashwin, you want to make any comment before I dive into some of the questions that are coming up?
No, why don't you do that Q&A, and then I'll wrap it up at the end
Okay,
for
great.
next webinar. Yeah.
All right, great. Let's see. Here's one from Kiran Chakravartulu. Thank you for introducing us to the EO metrics. Very interesting. How would the NBT diagnostics consider how the team would work in different domains or ideas? That can be a significant influence, of course, right? I hear you. You understand the question? NBT diagnostics?
I'm hoping when he says NVT diagnostics, he's probably the question is probably about new venture success, and then we go back to success being defined in different ways depending on which phase they are. And when you talk about entrepreneurial orientation at each phase, whether it is an idea on a piece of napkin that you're sitting in that when we used to sit in restaurants and have food, you could just come up with a smart idea, and that idea, instead of just saying it's smart by my own metrics, as I develop the idea using EO measures to actually go through your ideas and say, is this innovative enough? Am I capturing what will sell in the market? Is this innovative enough? Is this proactive enough? Is it going to allow me to take care of future challenges that my new venture will face? In terms of risk taking, what is my own propensity to accept the risks that my new venture will face? So you can turn the EO tools into a diagnostic capability, and that's why I shared some of the measures. Is you can either look at a scale and say the PATI method that I shared, saying the psychometric analysis is, as a faculty member, you can take the scale that is developed by Cohen and Slevin and use that as a rubric in your classroom to evaluate business ideas or new venture ideas that are being created. I hope this addresses the question. Otherwise, I encourage anybody who feels like we are not having an engaged conversation to reach out to me. My email is on the first slide, I think. And if not, Ashwin will be able to provide that information for all of us.
Okay, yeah, that I think Kiran said that was the question. So
okay.
it confirms that. And here's a question from, let's see, David, saying, okay, we're talking about high power, high status team members, and a little bit more about what you mean by that and the effect on performance.
Certainly, and this is a big area because social hierarchy in itself is a stream of well-established study, and I in the interest of time, I gave you very little information about high power and high status. When we talk about status and power, they are two different aspects of social hierarchy. And when I say social hierarchy, I'm not talking about organizational hierarchy, which again, from an Indian context, we are very strict on structural hierarchy. Right? I'm the supervisor, I am the founder, and then everybody who works under me is my subordinate. On contrary to that kind of a structural hierarchy, social hierarchy in terms of status and power, the status essentially is the amount of respect that a person commands. So if, let's assume I start a new venture and I invite a very well-established serial entrepreneur in the area to come and join me, there is a benefit to having them because we afford a lot more respect, and your own new venture gets the legitimacy of saying, well, if this serial entrepreneur who's been so successful thinks that this is a new venture, there should be some story to it. So there is a value to having high status individuals. When you talk about power, on the other side, power is the ability to access resources and be able to to leverage those resources for the benefit of the new venture. And this happens again with certain individuals just purely because of their connections. I might be a well-established person in my own geographical area. My networks are well established. So we often hear the saying, I can make a phone call and I can get you audience with this venture capital. That is a good show of power. While it has positive benefits, we can always find examples for when it can go wrong. Let's assume as a first-time entrepreneur, I probably have a great idea and I go bounce it off to this high-power individual, and they do not provide me the seal of approval, and rest of my team is watching. I think we all know what is going to happen when that kind of a conflict happens, where we are not in sync in terms of what idea to pursue. And this is again just an example of in terms of a response. I'm happy to share more of my research and discuss this with you separately.
Okay, we have a couple of questions before we go to Ashwin here from Felix. Why is the 3-month success peaking new ventures at 3-month success?
This research is based on secondary data, and there are a lot of factors that they have thrown it into the mix. I'm happy if you can leave your email in the chat. I can collect it from Ashwin and Krishna and probably send you the paper and then give you a quick summary as well.
Okay, next question from Vasant. The two things he wants your opinion on. One is established company teams, and the secondly, EO in small and medium enterprises.
Both are exceptional areas for research, and I hope that's if that is the question. But when you talk about new venture teams, I want you to just think back to one of the first slides I put on, which spoke about what essentially constitute new venture teams. And it can either be an independent team that is started by a group of people creating a new legal entity, or oftentimes we are more familiar with large companies that are just sending out a group of people to say, well, I don't want you to worry about the routine. Think of something like a skunk works, where they go out on their own to start thinking about creating proactive solutions for the future. And EO is a significant component in either of these cases. And a lot of my time and effort in EO research has been done in both established companies, looking at it as a company-based behavior, but the bulk of EO research actually rests in small and medium businesses. And earlier in my introduction, Ashwin mentioned about an article that we had recently submitted. It has since been published. And again, if for anybody is interested, that is a bibliographic assimilation of a lot of research in the area of entrepreneurial orientation. I'm happy to share that with you. I'm also on ResearchGate, so if you want to request the publication through ResearchGate, I'm happy to share it with you.
Okay, great. Sandhya, would you like to go back to your first slide? Just make sure everybody gets your email ID. In the meantime, I want to acknowledge that there's a huge team here from UMass Lowell entrepreneurship team that has joined us. I just want to acknowledge all of them and made them into the panel. So if they have any comments, they can unmute themselves. We have, of course, Jack Wilson, on whose name is the center is self-established. We've got Claire LePont, we've got Patricia Morena, we have Tom O'Donnell, we got William Yell, and we got Yi Yang. Welcome. Looks like you don't get tired of coming to these webinars. So great. Thank you all, everybody. Anybody want? Jack, come in.
I just wanted to say thank you very much, and it's very interesting, and it really makes us think about kind of things that we're doing in Wilson Center to try to support entrepreneurship, and at UMass Lowell in general, with all the different programs we have supporting entrepreneurship. So thanks so much for the great presentation. Thanks for the research you're doing. It'll really help future entrepreneurial programs really understand how they can be as effective as possible.
Thank you very much for your kind words. I think it's a great honor to have you in the audience. And I look forward to an opportunity to be able to contribute back. In some ways, UMass Lowell is my second home here, and being able to contribute back to the success of our own students, I would be very happy to be engaged in these conversations. Thank you very much.
All right, Yi, come in. Yi Yang.
Yes, Sandhya's presentation is very, very interesting and also very, very timely. Sandhya definitely catch the very important topic in entrepreneurship area, the team-oriented entrepreneurship research, and actually is a very under investigated area as well. And today, she presented the general literature and also on her own research and the remaining questions that call for further research. That's that is wonderful. I also have to thank all the audience that joined today's webinar, and they ask a lot of great questions. And we are looking forward to work with the researchers and the scholars from all over the world and doing the research in entrepreneurship area. And thank you, Sandhya. This is a great presentation.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Thank you, Yi. Sandhya has put up a nice picture of Happy Diwali. This is the big
Yes,
festival in India this coming weekend. So on that note, I'll give this back to Ashwin. Happy Diwali, Ashwin.
Krishna, I'd just like to mention that our Dean, Dr. Rittermeyer, is also in the audience. If she has a,
okay, I didn't
may
catch
want to
it.
comment on.
Yeah, so let me see if I can catch her. I looked around and I was caught everybody that I knew. Oh, there she is. Okay. And we'll unmute you, Sandra. Come in. You can unmute yourself now.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. What a great session. Just really appreciate all of Sandhya's great work, and it's just been so much fun to learn from her and watch her as she's developed so much thought leadership in this area, and just very excited for another great webinar. Sandhya, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge.
Thank you, Sandy. It's been always a pleasure to be part of the business school, and my interest is so much piqued by working alongside. I had such a great mentor in Dr. Yi Yang, and she has pushed me to exploring those areas which are rightly much in need in terms of entrepreneurship research, and hopefully we'll continue this contribution, maybe bring it into our curricular focus as well, because this is a great topic for us to be worried about here at both the Manning School and at UMass and across the world.
Okay, back to you, Ashwin.
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much, Sandhya. That was an excellent presentation, very interesting, and I'm sure the audience learned a lot about the topic of entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial orientation. Thank you all for attending this webinar. This was our 11th webinar. Amazing number of webinars that we had this year. We have one more to go, the last one for this year, and it is going to be, I know from knowing the speaker, the presenter, it's going to be very, very interesting and useful webinar. That will be on December 2nd. We will be sending out more information about it, so please plan to attend that. Thank you so much, Dr. Vedula. We really appreciate your efforts and collaboration with Jack M. Wilson Center for Entrepreneurship. And thank you so much. Thank you all, and have a good day.
Okay, everybody. Be happy, be safe, be healthy. Goodbye.
And best wishes for a happy Diwali to everybody in India.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.